When I think back on my experience with LEGO animation, one of the first names that comes to mind is Milo Price, also known as Milo Price Studios or Darth Milo 77. From his beginning in 2006 to his departure in 2011, his channel was almost synonymous with LEGO Star Wars on YouTube, and he achieved millions of views at a time when that was even more unusual than it is today. Even in 2006, YouTube was just getting started. His brick films were among the first I ever saw, when I had only recently discovered YouTube. It was expressing his passion in a new way, in a new format that was totally unfamiliar to me. I think the first one I saw was Aggressive Negotiations. It blew my mind seeing LEGO figures moving around and acting out an original Star Wars story, with visual effects and lightsaber sounds and John Williams music, and references to lore that I was familiar with, like Skakoans and the planet Metalorn. It felt like I was watching a brand new Star Wars movie right there on my parents' computer. I think it's only appropriate to begin this retrospective series on my favorite brick filmers with the first one who left a real impression on me. Now, I don't pretend to remember everything about Milo Price, or even my experience with him. I would have found him when he was already fairly popular. What I do remember, and what I think he nailed that a lot of others didn't, was tone. If I could describe a Milo Price video in one word, it would be playful. They took themselves just seriously enough without falling into absurdity. His work almost never felt mean-spirited towards Star Wars, but it wasn't simply repeating it either. If anything, it felt like it was celebrating Star Wars in a new way, playing around in the toy box and putting the characters in silly scenarios that still fit within the world of Star Wars if you squinted your eyes a bit. They were often the kind of stories you might find in the Rosencrantz and Guildenstern brand of fiction, or more appropriately, Tag and Bink, where you follow characters through events you never see on screen in the main story, but conceivably could have happened off to the side somewhere, however unlikely they might be. Could Anakin have taken a sick day off to go for a Ferris Bueller-style joyride before Attack of the Clones? Maybe. Could General Grievous have been job hunting before he was hired by Darth Sidious? Conceivably. Could a clone trooper have gotten a prank phone call that made him ignore Order 66? Who knows? I find his videos oddly cozy. That combination of classic John Williams music, the old LEGO aesthetic, and the rather laid-back tone of his voice that Milo often uses, makes it feel like you're watching the Star Wars characters during their off hours and just shooting the breeze or swapping stories. It feels like having a sleepover at your friend's house and messing around with their LEGO collection after you've had dinner. I think what sets his videos apart from many Star Wars videos made on YouTube, especially presently, is that he seems to be expressing genuine affection for the series, and at least at first he wasn't chasing popularity because there really wasn't much to be had. Did he get lucky with the rise of YouTube and the growing trend of brick films on the internet? Definitely. But deservedly so, I think. This wasn't something made with the purpose of appealing to kids. It was made by a kid because it appealed to him. To me, Milo Price feels of a kind with that era of Star Wars. His videos look and act and sound and smell like that time, that period between 2005 and 2008. He made his videos at an interesting time in Star Wars history. In one of his last videos, reflecting on his time on YouTube, he says that 2006 was the year after Revenge of the Sith, and so that was the latest Star Wars thing, and everyone thought it was going to be the last movie. He said that you really saw a lot of stuff just getting sort of interesting now that all the major questions between the prequels and the original movies had been answered. It seemed like it was a time to reflect on and celebrate the whole saga, since now that the story was complete, you could view everything with the hindsight of what 1 through 3 had brought to the table, including things like the Old Republic and post-Return of the Jedi eras. LEGO Star Wars the video game, LEGO Star Wars 2, and the complete saga were all released in this time frame and did just that. It was also a time to explore the unfilled gaps and tie things together, like the time period between the Clone Wars and Revenge of the Sith and A New Hope, as well as the Old Republic and New Republic eras. Even in the aspects where they aren't a direct influence, you can feel that cultural zeitgeist imbuing itself into everything. I think there's something kind of ethereal about these early Star Wars fan animations, seeing planets and kind of filling in the blanks mentally of how they would really look, but not quite able to fully picture it in your mind's eye. The Star Wars galaxy held a lot more wonder to me during that time. There weren't many new things coming out, so my imagination just kind of wandered to the less explored parts of the mythos, or re-examined and reimagined parts that I was already familiar with by now. And I think Milo Price encouraged me in a way to do that because that's essentially what he was doing in his own videos. Milo's early videos are mostly recreations of the 6 Star Wars movies at the time, which, while definitely the roughest in terms of animation, really evoke the essence of each movie, I think. I loved watching them not only to see those familiar scenes play out with the toy that I love, but also to see just how he did it. What scenes were essential for recapping the story of each movie in his mind? How would he accomplish this within the limitations not only of LEGO articulation and stop motion, but of the existing Star Wars sets and characters that had been made at the time? Seeing the scenes from the movies acted out with those figures and sets is cool because that's a big part of the appeal for a kid of playing with LEGO Star Wars as a brand. It's the imitation of the story. And unlike the LEGO Star Wars video game, it's done by a kid with the same sets that are ostensibly available to everyone. He captured in video format, I think, the joy of playing with LEGO Star Wars as a kid, because that's basically what he was doing. These recreations function basically as SparkNotes versions of the Star Wars movies. You're getting in some of the iconic visual moments while giving just enough of the story that you can follow it on its own. Though there are some moments that are surprisingly left out, like Han swooping in to save Luke during the Death Star battle, or Luke seeing the hologram of Leia on Tatooine. In his videos, Milo was seemingly influenced, or at least tapped into the same vein as the LEGO Star Wars games in terms of storytelling, humor, and general approach and style. There's no dialogue or vocalizations of any kind, and so they're almost like silent films. Relying on the pantomime characters, the sound effects, and the classic John Williams music to tell the story. He says that back in those days, Lucasfilm were a lot more encouraging of fan films and using the Star Wars music, whereas now those videos are often taken down or muted. His recreation of Knights of the Old Republic isn't as successful as those movie recreations because there's not as many iconic visual moments that a lot of people are familiar with, at least for ones that haven't played the game. But it's still interesting to see him paint that game with the same brush as the other Star Wars recreations, and it serves to legitimize Knights of the Old Republic in his canon, so to speak, as just as much a part of the saga as the movies are. His animation, as I said, is rough, but it gets the job done. It feels like he's playing with his Legos through the animating. What makes them stand out, at least from other videos at the time, is that they're clear enough to follow and still tell what's going on, and they even manage to create an atmosphere of their own in some ways. The whole thing feels a bit like a stage play sometimes, with how it uses black curtains and flat or cardboard backdrops. Milo Price in his early videos felt like a kid reenacting Star Wars with his Legos and just putting a camera up in front of it. I think this is something that a lot of kids either do or want to do because it's fun to play out stories you're familiar with in your own hands. One of my favorite things to do as a kid was to watch the Star Wars movies with my best friend in his basement. And we'd have all the Star Wars toys that we could carry gathered around us. And as soon as the movie was over, or sometimes even while it was still going on, we'd pick up the toys and play out the events of the movie. We often didn't have all the right characters or ships, so we'd pretend. We'd pretend that an X-Wing was Obi-Wan's starfighter, or that Boba Fett was Jango Fett. We pretended that we had a whole army of stormtroopers instead of just 2. We used the sofa as our Death Star and played with our figures on the cushions, or swooshed our ships around it. We pretend Padme was wearing her queen attire instead of her battle-damaged Geonosis outfit. We pretended a big rock was Jabba the Hutt, or that there wasn't a difference between our LEGO clone troopers and the Playskool ones. They fought side by side just the same. It was a way of immersing ourselves into the movies, interacting with it, and making it visceral for us. And when we were done with that, we made up our own stories with them. We had some clones go back to being good after Order 66, or imagine what it would be like if Luke could fight side by side with Anakin against Darth Vader. It didn't always make logical sense, but there was no need for it to. It was whatever imaginings that caught our fancy in that moment. Sometimes we acted it out ourselves with our lightsabers and pretended that we were multiple characters at the same time, switching roles as the situation demanded. In its own way, playing in the world of Star Wars was my first experience with storytelling, with coming up with ideas for stories and acting them out. What Milo Price did for me, I think, was take that to the next stage, to show me that I could take it to a new level with videos. You could share your stories with other people on websites like YouTube and maybe find other people who enjoyed seeing what you'd made, because deep down they had all done something similar at one point. I think I love this early period more for its imperfections than despite them. It lends a scrappy, homemade feel to these videos, which I think is a big part of their charm and why they spoke to me, because it felt like this was a kid making these videos on his own, with no one else's help really. It felt like something that I could do myself with my own Legos. There's instances where you can see glimpses of the room around him while he's filming, a bookshelf or an entryway. A lot of scenes are filmed on the floor, or on a bare tabletop with just a few base plates for figures to stand on. There's a rather charming use of non-Lego elements here and there, like a globe being used for the planet Alderaan, which is true to form with kids playing around with Legos and just making use of whatever they have around their house, incorporating it into their play. I like the use of simple base plates for the backdrops. As opposed to stacking bricks, he simply turns large base plates on their side. We have official Lego sets like the Jedi Defense Door and Cloud City filling in for various roles and backdrops, as well as the use and reuse of existing Star Wars sets, even if they're not quite accurate to the scene being depicted. For instance, Yoda's hut is used as a Tusken Raider hut in Attack of the Clones. He often has the right sound effects, but only a limited number of them, and so he reuses the same ones over and over again. There's the look of the space background, the opening crawl, credits, and on-screen text, the papier-mâché-looking model of the Death Star, the Star Destroyer playset bridge filling in as the Death Star observation room, despite how cramped it obviously is, the brick-built Tauntaun, the use of the Adventurer's Yeti as the Wampa, the promise of reduced pauses and smoother animation in the Star Wars Episode 6 trailer, the use of mostly simple pieces and items to fill in backgrounds and settings that match the simplified aesthetic of Legos at the time. It's also funny how the music in general sounds like he recorded it with his camera while playing it on a CD speaker, since I assume he didn't know at the time how to transfer MP3 files from a CD, or just didn't have the means available to him. And yet there's still enough attention to detail with things like the design and the camera angles that it feels authentic to the movie it's trying to depict. For instance, the female Tusken Raider has a white ninja hood, the Battle of Geonosis is depicted with a high camera angle that matches an iconic shot in the movie, etc. It's also just fun to see him create things that were never made officially in LEGO at the time, or using substitutes when he doesn't quite have the right set. The Jedi Council makes use of various customized heads built with Lego bricks or with Play-Doh. The Rebel Trooper helmets appear to be borrowed from an action figure. Boba Slave 1 is used in lieu of Jango Fett's, and Dooku's Solar Sailor is just a Geonosian starfighter. There are some fun alien designs on display. He's kind of fudging it with parts from some of the official Star Wars figures, like using the wrinkly Bib Fortuna as a female Twi'lek, or a Geonosian as the reptilian Bossk. Sometimes he uses clay, sometimes brick-built, and sometimes he just gives up. There are also a number of basic side builds either created by Milo or included in official LEGO sets that are made to fill various roles, since they were just vague enough that you could accept them in that different role even if it wasn't quite what they were meant for. One thing Milo Price has to his advantage in these recreations is that he has most of the essential sets to tell each story. Like, I don't know if he could really do Empire Strikes Back justice if he didn't have Cloud City. There are places where he has to fudge it a little bit and fill it in, but really he has most of what's needed, at least in terms of what was officially available from LEGO at the time. And as opposed to something like the LEGO Star Wars video games, there's something kind of fulfilling about seeing the movies reenacted with the physical sets themselves that you as a kid are either playing with or want to be playing with. Another fun aspect of these videos is to see some of the pieces that were common or more readily available at the time, like chrome lightsaber hilts, printed pieces, or specialty pieces from themes like Rock Raiders or RoboForce that fit in well enough in a Star Wars video but stick out just a bit. There's a use of raised base plates, neon transparent pieces, etc. that really planted in that period of time in a good way. There isn't a lot of custom building, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's been cannibalized from existing sets that have been partially disassembled. It does make for an interesting atmosphere where everything feels vaguely familiar to a LEGO Star Wars fan, but it's often used in a different context than intended in the original set. The Mos Eisley Cantina, for instance, is used as a bar on a city planet, and a clone swamp speeder is used as a pod racer equivalent in Knights of the Old Republic. There are certain pieces like helmets and torso prints that are part of the official LEGO Star Wars production line, but are still generic enough in their detail to pass for something else. Things like the Dengar torso and the Boga sculpt are used and reused in a variety of ways, such as the Crate Dragon for the latter. It was cool to see him take on the Old Republic and other things with the pieces available to him, since no specific sets had been made for that era. Some of the piece choices are also just interesting, like using transparent neon green studs for the medals, or Luke's farm boy torso for Leia, since I guess he didn't have her New Hope outfit. There's also some truly inspired choices, like the use of the Racer's Canyon baseplate for the pod race and the Tusken Raider encounter, which is absolutely perfect for that setting, and at the time I assumed it was just part of some Hasbro playset that came packaged with some Star Wars figures. Essentially, Milo Price was a brick and baseplate guy in terms of LEGO building. His sets really fit into that old LEGO style of the early 2000s, with just a few specialized pieces here and there to add flavor, with maybe some prints or specialized molds, but the rest of it is very flat and blocky. And I think that's in keeping with the theme of Milo Price videos being essentially a kid playing with Legos, because kids at that time in their life wouldn't really build a huge set or try to match the look of the scene exactly. They would build maybe a desk, a railing, a chair, a control panel, or some other important prop the characters interact with, but they wouldn't really be concerned with things like walls, since you want to have it open enough to play with your figures in. It's also worth noting that despite his age and the amateur nature of his videos, Milo displayed some proficient filmmaking. We have the Droideka shields, which are drawn on. We have orange neon studs for the molten metal door. We have miniatures. Use of box art to simulate the window view of the space battle in Revenge of the Sith, which I assume was intentional. Baseplate shaking to simulate explosions. Graphics like binoculars and technical displays. A clay sculpted face for Kit Fisto's head. Recoil when the clones shoot their blasters. He has moving light shafts on the Death Star elevator in the promotion video. There's a subtle hand twist when the clone is holding the phone in the Order 66 video. He's able to make characters or pieces float by holding them at the very edge of the frame so you don't see his finger. He's surprisingly good at cinematography and angles for stuff like forced perspective during the Battle of Hoth. It's clever how for things like Tusken Raiders or custom Sith Troopers, where he's clearly limited by the quantity of what he has, Milo uses camera trickery to mask it. Like he'll have the Sith Trooper fall or move slightly out of frame before taking his helmet off and then giving it to another trooper who then walks into frame more fully. If he had two Sith Troopers, he would have shown both of them on screen at the same time. If a scene calls for 4 Tusken Raiders but Milo only has 2, then he'll shoot the same 2 Tusken Raiders from opposite sides. It's interesting to see the evolution of camera angles, where he goes from a wide coverage that captures almost the whole scene in a kind of diorama or stage play setup that later on becomes more intentional. Things like the close-up of a Republic soldier in the Knights of the Old Republic recreation, with light shining on his face and a tilted baseplate as the backdrop to show the temptation of the dark side to strike down his opponent in that moment. I always loved the title cards Milo Price videos had. Whether it was the TIE Fighter with its wings disassembling to form the MSP logo, or the iconic lineup of classic characters from both trilogies. They lend a lot of character and identity to his studio apart from the videos themselves. If the reenactments were the innocent childhood phase of Milo Price's catalog, then the middle period was the adolescent phase. This period of Milo's videos saw a mix of Star Wars with mundane situations and concepts for humor. There was a promotion for a stormtrooper, an annoyed clone receiving phone calls so he misses Order 66. Obi-Wan outdoes Qui-Gon in training. Things like Darth Vader and a stormtrooper trading places for a day. Or retelling A Christmas Carol with Emperor Palpatine as Ebenezer Scrooge. Recycling in the Star Wars galaxy. C-3PO getting violent because of how Han always ignores him, and C-3PO actually being a human in a suit. It was the point in time when it was fun to just see familiar Star Wars characters get up to hijinks and act out of the ordinary, even if it was just seeing them do something mundane like making a phone call or applying for a job. We all knew and loved these characters, and now that the movies were done, it was time to just take it easy with them. No need for high stakes, really. The movies are done with. It's the same reason why there are so many comedic skits done about Batman, I think. We like to see these extraordinary heroes and villains doing something ordinary for a change, and the natural amusement that comes out of that mix of fantasy and reality. It's the kind of thing I think a lot of people on YouTube at the time would gravitate towards. It was during this time that he also made some original fan films with more of a story, like Aggressive Negotiations. I think around this time, when Milo started doing voices and having his own stories in his videos, is where he really came into his own as a YouTuber. It seems that this era of his videos is what's most widely remembered, and I think that's fitting because it feels in keeping with the style of YouTube humor and parody that you would see in videos like Darth Vader in Love or the Kill Bill Star Wars parody. It also has certain parallels with the Death Star cafeteria joke, which was also made into Lego at one point. These are the kind of videos that you would go to YouTube for at the time, I think. A 2 or 3 minute little gag. This is also where we get into some of the videos of his that have been taken down. To my knowledge, these are the only two that are not available in some shape or form, at least for Americans. They might be available in other regions, but the video Mandalorians Only sees a group of Mandalorians hogging a bench and not allowing other characters to sit on it. And the video Double Booked sees Chancellor Palpatine double booked for meetings with his Palpatine and Sidious persona. These are still available on the Brick Filmers Wikipedia for anyone who wants to see them. Something else I appreciate about these videos, and that isn't as prevalent in modern YouTube, is that he gave descriptions which provided insight into what he was thinking about in the process of making each video, as well as offering glimpses into its place within the YouTube landscape with things like the most discussed, top 20 in animation, etc. It's a fascinating look into the behind-the-scenes of Milo Price, but also a relic of a bygone era of YouTube when it was expected that you would actually read the description of a video. It's difficult to put into words the exact charm of this era, but I think the stars really aligned to the point that this is where Milo Price shines the brightest. Now, up to this point, Milo was putting out videos pretty regularly, but as we get into this final late period, uploads become less frequent to the point that they eventually just die off. It seems around this time Milo began to prioritize quality over quantity, and I think this shows with the era of his videos that I like best. He says that his favorite video he ever made was Solitary, and judging from the comments, that was generally one of the best liked of his. It started out as a simple idea for a one-off video, but he tripped over his camera cord and so had to send it to a specialist to fix the camera port for a whole summer, which was difficult for him since that was usually when he was the most active with making videos. He made the first 2 parts and so had to wait a while to make part 3. In the meantime, he got a lot of good feedback on those first 2 videos, and it inspired him to expand it to ultimately 10 parts. He would later compile all these parts into a complete video, but unfortunately this complete version would be taken down due to copyright. Although he had done fan videos such as Aggressive Negotiations before, I think Solitary is the first time he told a really compelling, emotional story within the Star Wars universe. While not as well remembered as his comedy sketch videos, I think Solitary is where he really reached his full potential. There are funny moments, but mostly it's about the one clone dealing with the situation that he's in. It's a simple premise, being stranded on a planet with no one else to save you and no means of contacting anyone, seeing essentially a story like Lost play out in the Star Wars universe, but it's effective and he tells the story well. It shows the perspective of a cog in the military machine, of a clone who's completely disposable, who doesn't matter enough to be rescued, but who still tries to fight on and live. I remember being really invested as each episode went on, and in episode 6, seeing the passage of time and how he lost hope over the years felt really intense and honestly kind of heartbreaking.
Year 23. 8 years since the crash. My chronometer stopped working. It's not the battery, and it's not the circuit board. Just wasn't built to last, I guess. Who knows?
I'm not sure what you mean, sir. We've been marooned here for 20 years.
You're serious? Well, the 3 of you can consider yourselves relieved of duty. The Republic reformed into the Galactic Empire decades ago. We hardly even use clones anymore.
and then to go on and see him spending one last night in the gunship he'd called his home for 20 years, and using a Republic insignia as a plate, signifying the Republic he fought and lived for, which had changed without him and left him behind. It was a very strong moment. In these later videos, Milo's visual effects work becomes more ambitious and impressive thanks to collaboration with Gareth Pugh, who was another big LEGO Star Wars YouTuber. He had things like laser effects in his early videos, but they become much more impressive in these later ones. They feel more like proper Star Wars fan films as opposed to simply messing around with Legos in front of the camera. Around the time he was finishing up Solitary, Milo Price also took a break to make Archaic: Beneath the Land Above, which would be one of his few non-Star Wars LEGO videos. Archaic gives us a look into how he might have approached other subjects that weren't straight-up parody or fan fiction. This would be a steampunk-inspired adventure with famed explorers Erasmus Burkham and Carl Gleaves, I hope I said those right, going on an adventure to unearth the secrets of a floating island. There are plenty of references and homages to the Adventurers and Rock Raiders theme, including but not limited to the use of torsos, heads, the Adventurers' hot air balloon, and the rock monster. There was an alternate version that was not posted to YouTube made with LucasArts video game music, and it is weirdly fitting as it has that feeling of a point-and-click adventure game. It's that 2000s brand of science fiction and fantasy, and I think the floating island is a perfect encapsulation of that era in the genre. He would later make an audio-only radio play with the Archaic characters called Intrigue in the West, since he didn't have time to make a fully animated sequel. I will say I didn't particularly care for Archaic due to its unlikable characters, but I guess that's kind of the point. It's a bit of a dark comedy, a subversion of what you were expecting. Still, it would have been interesting to see more non-Star Wars LEGO videos from Milo Price, as I think that if nothing else, Archaic shows that he is capable of telling non-Star Wars stories. Heck, if anything, his collection is extensive enough to feature a variety of ideas, but we often only see them through the lens of what's acceptable in a Star Wars video. It was at this time that Milo seemed to experience some burnout with an increasingly busy life schedule and less time to make animations. He seemed aware of how long it was taking him to do things at this point.
I am your subscribers. When are you going to finish the Solitary complete thing you're working on?
I don't know. Look, I'm kind of trying to sleep here.
Not good enough. Finish it now.
Okay. I'll upload it on April 27th.
Well, that's weird. I can't have been gone that long. There sure are a lot more birds in here than I remember.
His final animation, and his final video for years, would be an ad for a podcast hosted by some of the actors for Archaic. I remember feeling a lot of resentment for that video at the time because, frankly, I could have cared less about some podcast, and I felt insulted that the last video Milo made had so little substance and so little care put into it. It's understandable that he would be frustrated with an audience demanding videos that he didn't want to make anymore, though. I remember sitting on my parents' desktop computer around Christmas time one year and rewatching old Milo Price videos, and even seeing some that I'd never even seen as a kid. One of these was the April Fool's Solitary video. That was where I first heard the Civilization song that's very prominent in the Fallout games. I thought it was hilarious, and so showed it to my younger sister, and it became an inside joke for the two of us for a while. That would have been 2013, and I'd grown and changed quite a bit since Milo Price's videos, and he himself had gone off to college and gotten a job, and so no longer had time to make LEGO videos. He would later come back to make a few retrospective videos of his own, just talking about his experience and time on YouTube and Star Wars and LEGO, etc., and it was nice to hear his insights on his own channel. I respect that he's moved on with his life, and I wish him well. Milo Price to me really represents the possibility and sense of self-discovery of early YouTube, which is reflected in the progression of his videos from his early years to his last. And no matter how old I get and how jaded I become with the process of making videos, I always remember that first spark of excitement when I discovered Darth Milo 77 and felt inspired by his ability to take us to that galaxy far, far away on his own little table. Rewatching those videos that are almost 20 years old now, it was like taking my first steps into a larger world of LEGO animation all over again.